Have you ever met someone who warned you not to love them, only to be the first person to lose control the moment you whispered their name? That's the power of connection. Unexpected, undeniable, and stronger than any walls we build. People often believe that building emotional walls will keep them safe from disappointment, betrayal, or heartbreak. The billionaire in this story is no exception. His walls weren't built overnight. They were constructed through years of pressure, loneliness, and the relentless demand to be strong. When someone becomes successful at a young age or rises higher than everyone around them, they quickly learn that vulnerability feels dangerous. Someone like him, constantly analyzed and judged, convinced himself that the safest strategy was to feel less, to need nothing, to trust no one. Over time, these walls hardened into a fortress that kept the world at a distance, convincing him that emotional isolation was the price of greatness. Yet in reality, the fortress didn't protect him. It imprisoned him. Every brick in his invisible wall was carefully placed. Childhood disappointments, friendships that faded when money entered the picture, relationships that fell apart the moment someone wanted his wealth more than his heart. All these experiences taught him that letting people in only led to pain. So, he adopted a persona of control, power, and absolute independence. He became the kind of man who said, "Don't fall for me," not because he didn't want love, but because he didn't want to risk being vulnerable again. He believed that if he kept people at arm's length, if he maintained emotional distance, then nothing could hurt him. But what he didn't see was that every protective measure was slowly cutting him off from the very experiences that make life meaningful. Over time, his emotional walls did something else, something he never expected. They prevented him from receiving real connection. When people saw him, they saw the billionaire, not the man. They saw the polished exterior, not the ache behind it. Conversations became transactions. Relationships became responsibilities. Affection became suspicion. His walls didn't keep out the pain. They kept out the possibility of something beautiful. And in that cold distance, he became lonelier than he ever admitted. Even surrounded by wealth, he felt like no one truly knew him. The isolation was subtle at first, missed chances, shallow conversations. But over the years, it turned into a quiet, constant emptiness he couldn't name. Then she appeared. Someone who didn't care about his money, position, or power. Someone who didn't approach him with expectations or hidden intentions. Her presence alone challenged the purpose of his walls. She wasn't impressed by the empire he built. She was curious about the person behind it, and that threatened him more than anything. He could negotiate billion-dollar deals, but he didn't know how to handle sincerity. So his instinctive reaction was self-defense. The warning he gave her, "Don't fall for me," was not a declaration of confidence, but a plea to protect himself, a plea to prevent the possibility of caring. But emotional walls crumble fastest when they're touched with honesty, and the moment she spoke his name, softly and without expectation, something inside him cracked. When she said his name, she wasn't addressing the billionaire the world praised. She was addressing the man who had been hiding behind achievements for far too long. It was as though she reached through the walls and briefly touched the core of who he was, something he had buried under pressure, fear, and self-protection. That is the paradox of emotional walls. We build them hoping to never feel exposed again, yet the craving to be truly seen quietly grows inside them. He didn't melt because she loved him. He melted because she recognized him. And for a man who had spent years being defined by success rather than sincerity, hearing his name spoken with genuine warmth was an unfamiliar, disarming experience. In that moment, he realized how desperately he had missed being emotionally connected. Walls can delay pain, but they cannot erase human longing. The billionaire learned that the barriers he once believed were shields had turned into boundaries that kept him from living fully. The irony is that while he thought love would make him weak, it was actually the isolation that had been draining him all along. His warning was not meant for her, it was meant for himself. And though he tried to resist, life has a way of revealing truths at the moment we least expect. His emotional walls did not protect him from heartbreak. They protected him from happiness, and when she spoke his name, it reminded him that connection, real, authentic, vulnerable connection, is the only thing strong enough to reach the parts of us we hide from the world. For most of his life, the billionaire had been conditioned to believe that vulnerability was a flaw. In the world he grew up in fast-paced, competitive, and unforgiving. Emotions were considered liabilities. Feel too deeply, and you lose focus. Care too much, and you lose control. Trust the wrong person, and everything you've built can collapse. So he learned early on that the safest version of himself was the one who felt the least. He hid behind logic, strategy, and stoicism because those were the qualities that earned him success. But what no one told him was that hiding your heart may keep you safe, yet it also keeps you incomplete. What he interpreted as strength was, in truth, a quiet fear of being known. Every powerful moment in his life had come from control, controlling numbers, controlling decisions, controlling outcomes. Vulnerability offered none of that. There was no guarantee, no predictable return, no clear path. It was messy, unpredictable, and emotionally dangerous. So instead of letting people close, he perfected the art of staying distant. He allowed relationships to remain surface level, never crossing into the territory where emotions could influence him. When someone cared for him, he gently stepped back. When someone admired him, he redirected the attention. And when someone tried to understand him, he pulled away, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. He had spent years convincing himself that emotions were weaknesses successful people couldn't afford. Yet vulnerability has a way of finding us even when we resist it. The more he tried to detach, the more life reminded him that isolation comes with its own consequences. Late nights in his penthouse felt hollow. Celebrations felt quiet. Achievements felt dull. He had everything people dreamed of, yet the absence of emotional connection made each victory feel strangely empty. It's a truth many people only discover when they reach the top. Success can fill your world, but if you don't allow vulnerability, nothing ever truly fills your heart. And that emptiness, silent, persistent, undeniable, was the first sign that what he called strength was actually shielding him from the very experiences that make life worth living. Then she entered his life, not as a threat to his stability, but as a mirror reflecting everything he never allowed himself to feel. She was warm where he was guarded, sincere where he was cautious, open where he was controlled. She didn't try to break his walls or demand emotional access. Instead, she simply existed with honesty, and it was this honesty that began unraveling his long-held belief that vulnerability equaled weakness. He found himself listening to her more closely than he planned, noticing details he never paid attention to before. Her laughter, her way of speaking, her emotional clarity. Each of these things made him feel something he had spent years avoiding. Not because she intentionally stirred it, but because she made vulnerability look natural, not dangerous. The moment she said his name, something unexpected happened. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Calm, genuine, without fear, without motive. It was the type of softness he had never allowed himself to receive, and in that instant, he felt a shift inside him that he couldn't explain. His heart reacted before his mind could process it. It wasn't weakness, it was recognition. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, not as a billionaire, not as a symbol of success, but as a human being capable of feeling deeply. The doorway to vulnerability he had sealed shut for so long cracked open with a single, sincere moment. And he realized that vulnerability wasn't something people used against you. It was something that connected you to the world. True weakness, he finally understood, wasn't found in emotions. It was found in the refusal to feel them. Strength was not keeping people out. Strength was allowing someone in. Strength was not silence. Strength was honesty. Strength was not emotional distance. Strength was emotional courage. Vulnerability did not make him smaller. It made him real. And being real, being seen, being emotionally present, was something even billions could never buy. For the first time, he understood why people risk their hearts, why they choose love despite uncertainty, and why the bravest thing a person can do is simply allow themselves to be known. Genuine connection has a power that logic cannot explain and walls cannot withstand. For years, the billionaire had surrounded himself with people who admired his success, but never truly understood him. Every interaction felt predictable, calculated, almost mechanical. People were drawn to his influence, not his essence. They praised his achievements, not his character. They sought opportunities, not moments. Over time, he grew numb to the noise. He could listen to a room filled with voices and still feel alone. Real connection, the kind that reaches the depth of a person, had become so rare in his world that he almost forgot it existed. So when he met someone who spoke to him, not the billionaire, but the man, he didn't recognize what was happening at first. But something inside him softened, even if he didn't admit it. She didn't try to win him, impress him, or elevate herself in his presence. She didn't adjust her personality to fit his expectations or perform a polished version of herself to gain his approval. Instead, she met him with genuine curiosity, simple honesty, and the kind of calmness that made him forget the noise of his world. It was her natural authenticity that first caught his attention. While everyone else seemed to want something, from his guidance, his resources, his influence, she wanted nothing but the truth of who he was. And this was new to him, strange, disarming. It wasn't a connection built out of need or desire. It was a connection formed out of human sincerity. And those, he would soon learn, are the only ones strong enough to break barriers that have stood for years. He had built emotional walls to keep himself safe, but genuine connection doesn't knock, it seeps into the cracks and grows from the inside. Every conversation with her felt like an unexpected breath of fresh air. She listened without judgment, she laughed without pretense, she understood without pushing, and each time she spoke, she unknowingly chipped away at the coldness he had carefully placed around his own heart. He found himself thinking about her words after she left, replaying the moments that made him feel lighter, even if only for seconds. He wasn't used to someone seeing him without analyzing him. He wasn't used to someone asking about his day with sincerity rather than curiosity. For a man who controlled everything, the effortless way she reached him was almost frightening. There is a special kind of connection that doesn't feel like falling. It feels like remembering, as if two souls recognize something familiar in each other before the mind has time to question it. That is what she brought into his life. Not a whirlwind, not chaos, but recognition. And recognition breaks barriers because it reminds a guarded heart that it was never meant to stay locked. She didn't demand closeness. She simply existed with integrity. And in her presence, he found himself lowering his defenses without realizing it. He shared small truths about himself, things he hadn't said aloud in years, because she made it easy to be honest, not through force, but through comfort. Not through intensity, but through presence. But the moment that truly broke him was the way she said his name, not hurried, not hesitant, not heavy with expectation, just soft, warm, real. It was as if she was acknowledging him, not who the world expected him to be. There was no fear in her tone, no admiration, no agenda, just recognition. And that recognition traveled through every unseen barrier he had built. It reached the part of him he kept hidden from everyone, even himself. For the first time in a long time, someone spoke to him in a way that touched the layers beneath his strength, success, and silence. And instead of resisting, his heart responded. Because genuine connection doesn't need permission to enter, it only needs truth. Connection like this doesn't happen often. It arrives unexpectedly, quietly, and yet with a force strong enough to change everything. His barriers, built with years of caution and reinforced by past wounds, were no match for the sincerity she carried. Genuine connection breaks barriers not by force, but by reflection. It shows us the parts of ourselves we buried. It awakens emotions we believed we outgrew. It restores a softness we forgot was still inside us. And for a man who had spent so long believing that nobody could truly understand him, she became the exception, proof that even the strongest walls collapse when someone speaks to your soul, not your status. Love is one of the few things in life that cannot be controlled, predicted, or commanded. The billionaire had spent years structuring his world with precision. Every meeting scheduled, every investment calculated, every decision weighed for maximum advantage. Control was his comfort zone. It was how he navigated life and how he kept his emotions in check. But love does not obey logic. It doesn't follow timetables, contracts, or boundaries. It arrives when it wants, grows where it's allowed, and transforms even the strongest among us without asking permission. He warned her not to fall for him because he believed feelings could be regulated the same way he regulated his empire. Yet love, by its very nature, cannot be managed like a business. It happens naturally, quietly at first, then suddenly in ways that feel undeniable. She never chased him. That was the part that unsettled him the most. He had met many people who ran after his success, his attention, or his name, but she was not one of them. She didn't try to impress him or win his affection. She didn't behave differently around him or try to fit into the world he came from. She simply continued being herself, unbothered, present, sincere. And this authenticity created a space where feelings could grow naturally. He found himself observing her when she didn't know he was looking, noticing the small gestures that revealed her kindness, the way she spoke with genuine interest, the softness in her eyes when she listened. None of it was directed at him specifically. It was just who she was, and that sincerity drew him closer without either of them forcing it. Love grows in moments, not declarations. It grows in silence, in shared glances, in unexpected smiles. It grows in the comfort of being understood without explanation. For him, the shift began in subtle ways. He found himself wanting to share things with her. Stories he never told anyone. Frustrations he usually hid behind silence. Thoughts he never planned to speak aloud. He began looking forward to their conversations, noticing her absence when she wasn't around. What startled him most was that none of this was intentional. He didn't choose to feel differently. It happened on its own. His guarded heart responded to the purity of her presence before his mind had the chance to put up its usual defenses. Love, he realized, doesn't require effort to begin, only honesty and a willing heart. She, on the other hand, never tried to make him fall for her. She didn't change herself to match his lifestyle or attempt to become what she thought he wanted. Her feelings, if they existed at all, were quiet, respectful, and unspoken. She didn't push for closeness or demand his attention. Instead, she allowed their connection to unfold on its own. This absence of pressure was what made the bond between them so powerful. When something is genuine, it doesn't need to be rushed. It doesn't need grand gestures or intense declarations. It simply needs space to grow. And in giving each other that space, they created an environment where emotions could blossom naturally, without fear, without expectation, and without force. The moment she said his name was the moment everything he tried to control dissolved. It wasn't the words. It was the feeling behind them. The softness, the natural warmth, the lack of hesitation. It took him by surprise because it wasn't forced, planned, or rehearsed. It was simply her being herself, and that natural sincerity triggered something deep inside him, something he had spent years tucking away. His reaction wasn't a sign that he had fallen suddenly. It was a sign that he had been falling slowly all along without noticing. Love had been growing between them, layer by layer, in the spaces between their conversations, in the quiet comfort they shared, in the gentle familiarity that had been forming without effort. Love that happens naturally is the most powerful kind because it isn't rooted in desire, fear, or need. It is rooted in truth. It grows not from trying to possess someone, but from appreciating who they are. It evolves not from pursuit, but from presence. And for the billionaire, who had tried to guard himself, who had tried to control every aspect of his life, this natural, effortless connection became the one thing he could neither resist nor explain. It taught him that love does not arrive when we are ready. It arrives when we are open, even if we don't realize we are. It taught him that the heart has its own timing, its own logic, and its own quiet strength. People often assume that attraction comes from appearance, beauty, charm, the physical qualities that catch the eye. But real impact, the kind that reaches a person's soul, never comes from the surface. The billionaire had been surrounded by beauty his entire life. Models at events, polished smiles at fundraisers, elegant faces at business gatherings. He had seen every type of perfect appearance the world had to offer, and none of it ever moved him. It all felt curated, orchestrated, intentional. Beauty can turn heads, but it rarely touches hearts, especially hearts that have been disappointed too many times. He wasn't melted by her looks. He was melted by something far rarer, the feeling of truly being seen, understood, and valued without pretenses. She didn't view him through the lens of wealth or success. She didn't see the billionaire that the world praised, feared, or envied. Instead, she saw his silences, the way he hesitated before answering personal questions, the quiet exhaustion in his voice after long days, the loneliness he hid behind a confident exterior. She noticed the details most people overlooked, not his money but his mannerisms, not his reputation but his humanity. And this perception alone struck him in places no compliment about his status ever could. Because being admired is flattering, but being seen is transformative. When someone sees you, not the decorated version of you, not the successful image you project, but the true, vulnerable, unguarded you, it awakens a depth of emotion nothing else can reach. Her presence carried an honesty that made him feel recognized in a way he almost didn't know how to handle. She wasn't impressed by his achievements, and she didn't tiptoe around him the way others did. She asked genuine questions, offered genuine reactions, and held genuine curiosity about who he was behind the world-famous title. This sincerity made him feel visible, as if someone finally looked past the layers he hid behind. For years, he had been treated like an institution, an icon, a figure of influence, but she treated him like a person, and that simple shift broke through more of his emotional barriers than beauty ever could. When a person's truth is acknowledged, the heart responds instinctively, quietly, deeply, uncontrollably. The moment she said his name, he didn't hear admiration or awe. He heard recognition. She spoke his name the way you say something familiar, something understood, something real. There was no fear in her voice, no desire to impress, no attempt to gain favor. She said his name as if she were speaking to the man behind the armor, and that was why he melted. It wasn't the sound of his name, it was the meaning behind it. It was the way she spoke to him as though she could see the parts of him he never shows the world. The tiredness behind his eyes, the longing he hides in silence, the softness he keeps buried under responsibility. Her voice didn't just acknowledge him, it affirmed him. People melt when they feel chosen, not for their image but for their essence. This is what he felt with her. For the first time in a long time, someone was paying attention to the man, not the myth. Someone was responding to his emotions, not his influence, and this authenticity touched him in ways he didn't expect. The truth is, we are not moved by perfection, we are moved by understanding. We are not softened by admiration, we are softened by acceptance. Her ability to see him without judgment made him feel safer than luxury ever could. She offered a kind of emotional clarity that allowed him to breathe, to soften, to feel. Things he had denied himself for years. In the end, it wasn't her beauty that reached him, though she had plenty of it. It was her perception, her empathy, her ability to see the man beneath the layers of success he wore like armor. And once someone feels truly seen, deeply understood, and gently acknowledged, no amount of power or discipline can protect the heart from softening. Being seen is one of the rarest experiences in the world, and ironically, the one thing even the most guarded people crave without admitting it. She gave him that without trying, without forcing, without expecting anything in return, and that, more than anything, was why his walls began to melt every time she spoke his name. Safety is one of the most overlooked aspects of love. People talk about chemistry, attraction, excitement. But true emotional transformation comes from feeling safe in someone's presence. For a man like the billionaire, someone who had lived in the public eye, who had carried the weight of expectations, who had always been judged for every action, safety felt like a luxury he could never afford. Every room he entered expected perfection. Every relationship demanded performance. Every conversation carried hidden intentions. He learned early that showing his real self risked misunderstanding or exploitation. So he tucked away his softness, quieted his fears, and dimmed the parts of himself that didn't match the image he was forced to maintain. But when she entered his life, she created a space where he didn't need to pretend. For the first time in years, he didn't have to filter his thoughts or measure his emotions. He didn't have to be impressive, flawless, or in control. Her presence allowed him to breathe in a way he rarely did with others. She didn't analyze his words for hidden meaning, didn't treat him like a project, didn't try to fix him. Instead, she listened, carefully, sincerely, without rushing him or expecting anything in return. And that patience alone made him feel seen in a calmer, deeper way. He found himself expressing emotions he usually buried: frustration, fatigue, uncertainty, because she made those emotions feel valid rather than weak. Safety, he realized, wasn't about predicting the outcome. It was about trusting the person beside you enough to be unguarded. She created a comfort he didn't know he needed. Her reactions were soft, reassuring, and grounded. She didn't interrupt when he struggled to open up. She didn't judge when he admitted the flaws behind his successes. She didn't pull away when he revealed the loneliness that came with his status. Instead, she responded with understanding, not pity. And this difference mattered. Pity makes people feel small. Understanding makes people feel human. Her ability to accept him without glamorizing his achievements or diminishing his struggles made him feel safe in his own truth. That kind of safety is rare, so rare that most people live without ever experiencing it. But once you do, you begin to crave it more than anything else. Safety also appeared in the small, unspoken ways. The calmness in her tone when she spoke to him, the softness in her eyes when he looked at her, the way she didn't rush conversations or demand emotional explanations, the way she respected his pace and never pushed him to reveal more than he was ready for. He had spent so much of his life being needed, being used, being relied on. But with her, he simply felt accepted. Not for what he could provide, not for his power or influence, but for who he genuinely was beneath all the layers. Safety isn't built by intensity, it's built by consistency, and she gave him that consistency without even trying. The moment she said his name, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: trust, real trust. The kind that comes not from obligation but from recognition, the kind that grows not from history but from honesty. Her voice carried no judgment, no expectation, no ownership, only understanding, and that understanding wrapped around him like warmth in a cold room. It reminded him that he didn't need to keep proving himself to be worthy of someone's care. He didn't need to hide the tired parts of his heart. He didn't need to perform the role of the untouchable billionaire. With her, he was just a man allowed to feel, to hope, to soften, and being allowed to simply exist without perfection was a form of safety he had craved without even knowing. It is said that the right person doesn't complete you, they free you. They free you from your fears, your insecurities, your need to constantly protect yourself. They free you from the past versions of yourself that you built out of survival. With her, he found that freedom, not in grand gestures, but in peaceful moments, in the comfort of silence, in the sincerity of her attention, in the effortless way she made him feel accepted without condition. And for a man who spent years believing his heart needed armor, she proved that all he ever needed was a place, and a person, where he felt safe enough to be who he truly was. As she walked away from the conversation, the winter air outside the office felt different, lighter somehow. Her heartbeat slowed, steadying with every step. For the first time in weeks, the knot in her chest began to unwind. She didn't know exactly how her boss would react on Monday, and maybe that uncertainty still stung a little. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She had chosen herself, her boundaries, her peace, her holiday. That Christmas, she sat beside the people who loved her without conditions, laughing over mismatched ornaments and half-burnt cookies. For the first time in a long time, she felt exactly where she was meant to be. And in that quiet, warm, honest moment, she realized something profound. Saying no wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything she deserved.